I was standing in the dark of my kitchen, the cold linoleum seeping through my socks, staring at the encrypted motion alert on my phone. My right hand was resting heavy on the grip of my legally registered 9mm pistol sitting on the granite counter. It was 11:45 on a Monday night, just hours before the annual Homeowners Association meeting. For 6 grueling months, I had watched our HOA president trespass on my property, quietly building an airtight civil lawsuit. But tonight, he crossed the ultimate line. Through the crystal-clear infrared feed of my hidden cameras, I watched him walk past the air conditioning unit, step directly into the crushed velvet hosta bed, and press his face against the glass of my 5-year-old daughter's bedroom window. He raised a small tactical flashlight, shielding the beam with his hand, and shined it through the blinds. Every single primal instinct I possessed as a father, as a Texan, and as a man screamed at me to rack the slide, kick open the back door, and end the threat right there on the wet grass. The castle doctrine in this state gave me the explicit legal right to use lethal force to protect my family from a nighttime intruder looking into a child's room. I picked up the heavy weapon. My thumb rested on the cold steel of the safety. Then, I heard a soft footstep behind me in the hallway. "Mark," Sarah whispered. Her voice was trembling, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. She was standing in the shadows, clutching her thick cotton robe, her eyes darting frantically from the gun in my hand to the glowing screen of the laptop on the island. "What is it?" "Is he back?" she asked. "He is at Lily's window," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. Sarah gasped, stepping forward to look at the monitor. The high-definition black and white feed showed him standing there, a voyeuristic shadow pressed against our brick wall. Her hands flew to her mouth, and then her expression hardened into pure, terrifying maternal panic. "Call the police. Call them right now, Mark," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Or so help me God, give me that gun, and I will go out there myself." "Sarah, look at me," I said. I stepped into her line of sight, keeping my tone perfectly level to ground her. "If I shoot him, or if we call the cops right now, he gets arrested for a simple misdemeanor prowling charge. He posts a $500 bail by morning. The neighborhood is swarmed with squad cars. The kids wake up terrified, and we spend the next 2 years and $100,000 defending ourselves in a civil wrongful death or assault suit." I pointed a steady finger at the laptop screen. "The camera is recording. The timestamp is locked to a secure server. If we let him walk away tonight, tomorrow evening, I am going to play this exact video on a 12-foot screen in front of 50 of his neighbors, his wife, and the county sheriff. We do not just put him in handcuffs, Sarah. We take his house. We take his money. We destroy him permanently." She stared at me, tears of pure anger pooling in her eyes, breathing heavily. She looked back at the screen just as Richard Vance finally lowered his flashlight, stepped out of the flower bed, and slinked back through the cedar gate into the night. Sarah let out a shaky, exhausted breath, grabbing the edge of the granite counter until her knuckles turned white. $80,000, she whispered, referencing the lawsuit draft our attorney had prepared. "You make sure that bastard pays every single dime, Mark, or we are packing our bags and moving." "I promise," I said. I ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and locked the weapon away in the biometric safe. I didn't sleep a single second that night. I just sat at the kitchen island, drinking black coffee, watching the empty camera feed, and thinking about exactly how we got to this point. My name is Mark Davies. I am 42 years old, and for the last 18 years, I have worked as a commercial low-voltage security engineer. I do not install cheap, plastic, battery-powered doorbells for residential homes. I design and install enterprise-level surveillance infrastructure for data centers, corporate campuses, and high-net-worth individuals across the state of Texas. I know how to make a microlens completely disappear into a brick wall, and I know exactly what kind of digital evidence is required to hold up in a strict court of law. 5 years ago, Sarah and I decided we were tired of renting and wanted a permanent sanctuary. We bought a beautiful 4-bedroom brick home on a 0.3-acre lot in Collin County. We paid $540,000 for it. It was our dream home. We knew the neighborhood was governed by a homeowners association, but the monthly dues were only $150, and the community areas were heavily landscaped and immaculate. I just wanted to come home after a brutal 14-hour shift, drink a cold beer on my back patio, and be left alone. But Richard Vance would not allow that. Richard was the 62-year-old president of our HOA. He was a retired corporate middle manager from some logistics firm, and he drove a pristine, blindingly white 2020 Lexus RX. He constantly patrolled the streets at 4 miles per hour, carrying a full leather clipboard and a yellow Stanley 25-foot tape measure clipped to his braided leather belt. Our very first interaction set the tone for the next 5 years. I was in my driveway unloading heavy boxes of networking gear from my work truck one evening when he pulled up, rolled down his passenger window, and pointed at my plastic trash cans. They were sitting by the curb at 6:15. The local sanitation truck had just picked them up at 2 o'clock. "Evening, neighbor," Richard said, giving me a tight, condescending smile that completely failed to reach his eyes. Just a friendly reminder. Section 4, Paragraph B of the community bylaws clearly states that all refuse receptacles must be concealed from street view by 6 o'clock sharp. We like to keep things looking sharp around here. I looked at my watch, then looked back at him. "It is 15 minutes past 6, Richard. I just got home from work." "Rules are rules, Mark," he said, literally making a check mark on his clipboard. "Consider this a verbal warning. Next time, it is a $50 fine." I just rolled the cans behind the fence and brushed it off as the pathetic behavior of an overzealous retiree with absolutely no real authority in his own life. But things escalated quietly over the years. We received petty violation letters about the exact shade of our cedar mulch. We got written warnings because the canopy of our mature oak tree was hanging 2 inches too low over the public sidewalk. Then, it stopped being about the landscaping. It became physical. In April, I walked out to the backyard and found my heavy wooden side gate unlatched, swinging in the wind. A few weeks later, after a heavy spring thunderstorm, Sarah found muddy, heavy-soled footprints on our $4,000 stamped concrete patio. The footprints led directly up to our living room bay windows. I bought a heavy-duty $45 master lock and secured the gate, hoping a thick steel barrier would send a clear message. The actual catalyst, the day this turned into a war, happened on a brutal 102-degree afternoon in mid-August. I was downtown routing cables when my phone rang. It was Sarah. She was crying so hysterically I could barely understand her. "Mark, you need to come home right now," she sobbed into the receiver. "Somebody broke into the backyard. The lock is gone. The gate is wide open." I dropped my crimping tools, ran to my truck, and drove the 28 miles home with my hazard lights flashing. When I pulled into the driveway, I walked straight to the side gate. The metal hasp was bent at a violent 45-degree angle. The heavy padlock was sheared completely in half, lying in the dirt. Someone had taken massive, commercial-grade bolt cutters to it. I crouched down. Fresh, heavy-soled. Footprints led from the broken gate, right up to our master bathroom window. Sarah was inside, holding our golden retriever by the collar, completely terrified. I called the Collin County Sheriff's Office. A deputy arrived an hour later, took some photos of the broken lock, and sighed. "Mr. Davies, without video footage or an eyewitness, this is just a vandalism report," the deputy explained. "I cannot go knock on your HOA president's door based on a hunch about a shoe size. Get yourself some cameras." That night, sitting at the kitchen table, Sarah looked at me with red, exhausted eyes. "Mark, I don't feel safe here anymore," she said, her voice cracking. "Not in the shower, not letting the kids play in the grass. We should just list the house. We have equity. We can move somewhere without an HOA." I looked at my wife, seeing the fear in her eyes over a house we had poured our life savings into, and a cold, methodical anger settled into my chest. I reached across the table and took her hand. "I am not running away from my own home, Sarah. I am not letting a bully with a clipboard chase us out of our castle. Give me 48 hours. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I am going to do what I do for a living," I replied. "I am going to turn this property into a digital fortress. And I am going to catch this bastard dead to rights." Geminido NOI. I drove past the retail big box stores and went straight to my company's commercial warehouse in Dallas. I was not about to rely on some cheap, battery-powered plastic doorbell to protect my family. Those consumer gadgets drop frames, lose Wi-Fi connection, and are completely useless in the dark. I needed the heavy artillery. I pulled out my personal credit card and spent exactly $2,847. I grabbed a rack-mountable network video recorder with a 4 terabyte solid-state drive and 5 specialized microdome surveillance cameras. These were covert lenses, barely the size of a quarter, designed for casino tables and high-end retail anti-theft installations. They had native resolution and military-grade infrared night vision. But the most critical feature, the one that would eventually become the cornerstone of our entire lawsuit, was the firmware. These cameras recorded 24 hours a day with unalterable timestamps burned directly into the raw video files. No defense attorney in the state of Texas could ever stand up in court and claim the footage was edited. Sarah took the kids to her mother's house in Plano for the weekend. I needed absolute, uninterrupted focus. I spent my entire career in hot server rooms, but that Saturday afternoon in August was a special kind of hell. It was 104 degrees outside. Up in my uninsulated attic, right under the black tar roof shingles, it was hovering around 135. Within 10 minutes, I was completely saturated with sweat. But the methodical, cold anger burning in my chest gave me a strange, boundless energy. I did not mount a single camera on the eaves where Richard or anyone else could see them. This was a digital ambush. I spent 3 grueling hours hollowing out a defunct, decorative sprinkler head right by the edge of the hosta garden bed. I mounted a micro lens inside it, giving me a perfect, undetectable ground-level view of the entire stamped concrete patio. I installed another camera inside a custom-built wooden birdhouse, mounting it on a steel pole right by the cedar fence line, pointed directly at the shattered gate latch. I placed a third camera behind the wooden gable vent in the attic peak. By Sunday night, after 14 continuous hours of brutal physical labor, my property was the most secure piece of real estate in Collin County. I did not have to wait long for the trap to spring. It was the following Tuesday, August 20th. I was sitting at my mahogany desk at work, pulling up a network schematic for a new client, when my phone violently buzzed against the wood. It was a priority motion alert from the birdhouse camera. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I stopped breathing, minimized my work email, and opened the secure surveillance app. The real-time live video feed was crystal clear. The heavy cedar side gate creaked open. Stepping into my private, fenced-in backyard, wearing crisp khaki shorts, a light blue polo shirt, and carrying that damn yellow tape measure, was Richard Vance. I just sat there in my office chair, my eyes locked onto the monitor, my fingers gripping the edge of my desk until my knuckles turned completely white. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a deep, suffocating rage. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was staggering. This man was opening my gate and walking onto my property with the casual confidence of a medieval lord inspecting his serfs. He did not look nervous. He did not look over his shoulder. He just strolled in, pulled out his tape measure, and started measuring the distance from my barbecue grill to the fence line, writing down numbers on his clipboard. Then, he put the tape measure away and did something that made the blood roar in my ears. He walked over to the patio, right up to the large bay windows of our living room. He cupped his hands around his eyes to block the harsh glare of the morning Texas sun, and he pressed his face right against the glass. He spent a full 2 minutes staring deep into the interior of my house. Sarah was at the grocery store, thank God, but he did not know that. He stood there spying into my private living room before walking over to the master bathroom window and doing the exact same thing. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed Sarah's number. She answered on the second ring, the sounds of a supermarket checkout line in the background. "Mark, what is it?" she asked. "He was just there, Sarah," I said, my voice tight and strained. "Richard Vance. He just walked right through the gate and spent 10 minutes looking through our living room windows. I have the whole thing on video." I heard her breath hitch over the phone. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, and then her voice pitched up in panic. "Mark, call the police right now. Send them the video. Have him arrested. I am not taking the kids back to that house until he is in handcuffs." I closed my eyes, rubbing the bridge of my nose. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully. If I call the Collin County deputies right now and show them this one video, they might cite him for simple trespass, a Class C misdemeanor. He will go to court, wear a nice suit, tell the judge he is the HOA president, and claim he was doing a routine compliance check because of a drainage complaint. The judge will give him a $200 fine and tell him to be more careful. I don't care about the fine, Mark. I want him away from our house," she yelled, no longer caring who heard her in the grocery store. "Sarah, a $200 fine does not stop a man like this," I pleaded. "It only makes him angry. He will stay on the board, and he will use his authority to absolutely bury us. He will fine us for the grass, the paint, the driveway, until we are forced into foreclosure. If we want to destroy his authority and make sure he never comes near our family or anyone else's ever again, one video is not enough. We need a pattern. We need to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that this is systematic, predatory stalking. We have to be patient. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. "I am terrified, Mark," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I am terrified in my own home." "I know, baby. I know. But I promise you, I am going to build a wall of evidence so high it will crush him. Just give me time." That conversation started the most grueling, exhausting 6 months of my entire life. It became a psychological war of attrition. Sarah stopped opening the blinds in the back of the house. We kept the deadbolts thrown 24 hours a day. Our home felt like a beautiful $500,000 prison. And every time Richard crossed my property line, I meticulously downloaded the video from 3 different angles. I created a massive spreadsheet. Column A was the date. Column B was the exact time of entry and exit. Column C was a detailed description of his actions. Over that fall and winter, Richard entered my private, fenced backyard a staggering 38 more times. Sometimes he came at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. Sometimes he came at 6:30 on a Saturday morning, right as the frost was still on the grass. He measured our lawn. He took photographs of our air conditioning condenser unit. It was completely maddening. There were weekend afternoons where I would be sitting in my living room, watching television with my kids, and my phone would buzz in my pocket. I would look at the screen and see him standing literally 10 feet away on the other side of the brick wall. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to throw open the back door and beat him halfway to death. But I stayed disciplined. I let the rope out, inch by inch, letting him hang himself with his own arrogance. By March of the following year, I had 39 individual, encrypted folders of high-definition digital evidence. I had over 18 total hours of footage. It was finally time to shift to the offensive. I scheduled a consultation with David Miller. Miller was a high-powered, aggressive real estate and civil litigation attorney based out of a sleek high-rise in downtown Dallas. He charged $350 an hour just to have a conversation, but his reputation in Texas was absolute. He specialized in property rights and destroying tyrannical HOA boards. I walked into his beautiful suite, featuring dark mahogany desks and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Dallas skyline. Miller was a sharp guy, about 55, wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my work truck. He listened quietly, tapping his gold pen on a yellow legal pad, as I explained the situation, from the trash cans to the broken padlock to the constant creeping. "You need absolute proof of intentional, malicious trespass that falls entirely outside the scope of normal board duties, Mr. Davies," Miller explained, offering a polite, professional smile. "You need to show that he entered a secured area without notice and that it caused quantifiable emotional distress. Do you have anything beyond your word and a picture of a broken lock?" I did not say a word. I unzipped my bag, set my laptop on his expensive desk, and opened the master evidence folder. I clicked on a video file from a freezing Tuesday afternoon in December, turned the screen toward him, and hit play. Miller watched. He watched the crisp infrared video show Richard Vance using a metal pry bar to violently snap a newly installed latch on my gate. A small but noticeable gasp escaped the lawyer's lips as the video cut to Richard walking in, measuring Sarah's outdoor planters, and then cupping his hands against the glass, staring into my living room for 3 agonizing minutes. Miller's professional, detached demeanor completely evaporated. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Jesus Christ," Miller muttered. "Is this the HOA president?" "Yes, sir," I replied calmly. "Richard Vance. And I have 38 more videos exactly like that one, spanning the last 6 months. Time-stamped and synchronized." David Miller leaned forward, steepling his fingers, his eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of a lawyer who just got handed a winning lottery ticket. "Mark, under Texas Penal Code Section 30.05, this is criminal trespass," Miller said. "But more importantly for our civil case, I have reviewed your community's master covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Richard Vance is legally bound by these bylaws. Section 9, Paragraph D states the association is required to provide a minimum of 48 hours written notice before entering private, fenced-in property for any compliance inspection. Did you receive any such notice for any of these 39 entries? Not a single piece of paper, sir. Not an email, not a letter, not a phone call, I said. Miller stood up and walked over to the window, looking out over the city. This is a massive, catastrophic liability for their insurance provider, Miller said, turning back to me. He has breached his fiduciary duty, violated your fundamental civil rights, intentionally inflicted severe emotional distress on your wife, and broken state law. The HOA's master insurance policy covers board members for administrative errors, but it absolutely does not cover intentional criminal acts. We are not just going to sue the HOA corporate entity. We are going to pierce the corporate veil and sue Richard Vance personally. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the tactical battle plan. We calculated the hard damages. $4,200 for the high-end security equipment and my standard labor installation rate. $10,000 for the property damage to the gates, the locks, and the landscaping over the months. But the real hammer was the emotional distress and systematic invasion of privacy. We set the initial, opening demand at exactly $80,000. We are going to serve him the lawsuit in public, Mark, Miller said with a rare, brutal smile. At the upcoming annual HOA board meeting in mid-April. But let's see if he makes one more mistake before then. Give him enough rope. 2 weeks before the annual April meeting, Richard made his final, fatal error. Arrogant men always leave a paper trail because they believe they are untouchable. I was walking back from the mailbox on a windy Thursday afternoon when I found a heavy cardstock envelope with the official HOA seal stamped on the top left corner. It was a certified notice of violation, printed on thick paper and signed at the bottom in Richard's distinctive blue fountain pen ink. He was officially fining me $500 for unapproved alterations to backyard landscaping and failure to maintain proper drainage grades along the fence line. It was a completely fabricated charge designed to put a financial squeeze on me right before the holidays. But it was not the fine that made me stop dead in my tracks in the middle of my driveway. It was the attachment. Stapled to the back of the violation notice was a 4x6 glossy printed photograph of my backyard air conditioning condenser unit in the Hosta garden. He was using it as evidence of my poor drainage. But the angle of the photograph was undeniable. To capture that specific downward angle, standing that close to the brick facade, the photographer had to be standing a full 12 feet inside my locked, private wooden fence. Richard Vance had literally mailed me photographic, documented proof of his own criminal trespass sent through the United States Postal Service. I walked inside and placed the letter on the granite kitchen counter. I called Sarah into the room and showed it to her. For the first time in 6 months, she did not look scared. She just stared at the photograph, then looked up at me and actually laughed. A cold, hard, exhausted laugh. The fear was completely gone, replaced by the realization that we held every single card in the deck. We had him dead to rights. Pay it, she said, tapping the violation notice with her fingernail. Pay the fine. I immediately pulled out my checkbook, wrote a check for exactly $500, and mailed it to the HOA management company that same afternoon via certified mail. I kept the carbon copy and the tracking receipt. Attorney Miller had specifically instructed me to do this if I received any fines. We wanted to show the civil court judge that I was a perfectly compliant, rule-abiding homeowner who was paying his dues and suffering financially under a tyrannical, obsessive system. We were building an airtight, sympathetic narrative. The trap was fully set. All we had to do was wait for the annual meeting on Tuesday night. And then came Monday night. The night Richard Vance decided to push his luck one last time and look into my 5-year-old daughter's bedroom window. The night I almost shot him dead on my own lawn. I drove to the community recreation center on Tuesday evening with a completely clear head. The adrenaline from the previous night had settled into a cold, diamond-hard focus. The annual HOA meeting was held in a large, echoey brick building near the neighborhood entrance. It always smelled faintly of stale coffee, damp winter coats, and industrial floor wax. It had been raining that morning, so the air inside was thick and humid. There were exactly 47 homeowners in attendance, sitting in uncomfortable folding metal chairs arranged in neat rows. At the front of the room, sitting behind a long plastic folding table, was the HOA board of directors. Richard Vance sat dead center. He was wearing a beige suit and a pale blue tie. He was shuffling his stacks of paper, looking incredibly important and completely in control. You would never look at this crisp, authoritative man and guess he was the same predator creeping through my wet hosta garden with a flashlight just 12 hours earlier. I sat in the fourth row, on the aisle. Sarah sat directly next to me. I could feel the tension radiating off her skin. Her posture was rigidly straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I had my company laptop resting inside my padded messenger bag, along with a 6-foot braided HDMI cable. The meeting dragged on for a miserable 45 minutes. They discussed the upcoming summer pool maintenance budget, the new landscaping contract for the front entrance monuments, and the logistics for the neighborhood block party. I just sat there, breathing slowly, listening to the rain tap against the metal roof of the building. Finally, Richard cleared his throat, adjusted his microphone, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Moving on to compliance issues, Richard announced. His eyes immediately scanned the crowd, panning over the rows of faces until they locked directly onto mine with a familiar, arrogant smirk. He puffed out his chest slightly. The board has been dealing with several ongoing issues regarding homeowners outright refusing to adhere to property standards, Richard said, his voice loud and authoritative, specifically regarding unauthorized backyard modifications. The board is preparing to file property liens against repeat offenders to force compliance and protect the property values of the entire subdivision. He was looking right at me. He was threatening to put a legal, financial lien on my $540,000 home over a fabricated drainage issue. Sarah's hand shot out and gripped my knee. Her fingernails dug through the heavy denim of my jeans. "Do it," she whispered, her voice shaking with restrained fury. I unzipped my messenger bag. I stood up from my metal chair. "Mr. President," I said. My voice projected clearly across the silent room, cutting through the low hum of the fluorescent overhead lights. "Before we discuss placing financial liens on people's homes, I would like to present some documentation regarding HOA inspection protocols. I believe the entire community needs to see this before any votes are cast tonight." Richard frowned deeply, his face flushing with immediate annoyance. He adjusted his blue tie and leaned aggressively into his microphone. "Mr. Davies, this is an organized meeting, not an open floor for personal grievances," Richard snapped. "If you have an issue with your recent $500 fine, you can submit a written appeal to the management company within 30 days. Sit down immediately." "It is not a grievance, Richard," I said. I stepped out of the row and walked straight down the center aisle. "It is an independent security audit of your personal inspection methods," I added. I did not wait for his permission, and I did not stop walking. I walked straight up to the front of the room where the community's digital projector was set up on a rolling AV cart. It was currently displaying a boring pie chart of the annual budget on a 12-foot drop-down screen. I pulled my laptop out, booted it up, and plugged the HDMI cable directly into the projector. The large white screen behind the board members flickered violently for a second, then my high-definition desktop background appeared. I opened a folder labeled Legal Evidence, and I clicked on a media file named Vance Supercut. It was a 5-minute, professionally edited highlight reel I had finished rendering that morning. I hit play, and I stepped back to stand next to my wife, who had walked up to join me at the front of the aisle. The room went completely dark as the projector beamed the first video clip. It was the uncompressed infrared footage from that freezing Tuesday morning in December. The screen showed Richard Vance, rendered in stark black and white, using a heavy steel pry bar to violently snap the latch on my side gate. The loud, metallic crunch of the lock breaking echoed through the recreation center speakers. A collective, audible gasp ripped through the room of 47 people. Then the video cut to a bright daytime shot. It showed Richard walking through my garden beds, crushing Sarah's plants, and photographing my patio. Then, the screen went black for 2 seconds. The final clip began. The timestamp in the bottom corner glowed brightly. It read 11:48 p.m. The date was yesterday. The high-definition night vision showed Richard Vance slipping through the gate in a dark jacket. It showed him walking straight across the wet grass, stepping deliberately into the flower bed, and stopping directly beneath my 5-year-old daughter's window. He cupped his hands against the glass, pressed his face to the pane, and shined his tactical flashlight into the dark room. The silence in that recreation center was absolute. It was paralyzing. You could hear the whir of the projector fan and the sound of people holding their breath. I looked over at the folding table. The other 3 board members were staring up at the screen in absolute, unadulterated horror. Brenda, the community secretary, a sweet older woman in her 60s, had both of her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Richard's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. All the blood had drained entirely from his cheeks. The arrogant, condescending smirk was gone, replaced by the panicked, erratic movements of a trapped animal. He jumped up from his metal chair so fast it tipped over backwards and crashed loudly onto the linoleum floor. "Turn that off," Richard screamed, his voice cracking violently. He pointed a trembling, manic finger at me. "That is doctored footage. You cannot film me without my explicit, written consent. That is an illegal wiretap. Turn it off right now." I did not touch the laptop. I turned around and faced the crowd. "Actually, Richard," I said calmly, projecting my voice so everyone in the back row could hear the absolute finality in my tone. "Texas is a one-party consent state for recording. And more importantly, you have absolutely no reasonable expectation of privacy when you are actively committing criminal trespass on my locked, fenced-in, private property. Property that you illegally entered 40 separate times over the last 6 months, without ever providing the legally mandated 48-hour written notice required by Section 9 of our own HOA bylaws." A man sitting in the third row stood up. It was Dave, the burly, bearded guy who drove the lifted Ford truck. I knew he was a retired Marine who had done 2 tours overseas. He pointed a thick, calloused finger directly at Richard's face. "Were you looking into his little girl's bedroom window, Vance?" Dave growled. "Are you out of your damn mind?" "I was checking the drainage grade." Richard stammered, sweat profusely beading on his forehead. He looked desperately at the horrified faces of his neighbors, trying to salvage his crumbling empire. "I was protecting the property values. You people don't know how to maintain a neighborhood. I protect your investments." "You are a sick son of a bitch," Dave shot back, taking an aggressive step out of his row toward the front table. The entire room erupted. Complete and total chaos. 47 people started yelling all at once. Neighbors who had been quietly bullied and fined by Richard for years suddenly realized the terrifying extent of his obsession. People were demanding he resign immediately. Sarah stepped forward, her voice cutting sharply through the deafening noise. "You came near my daughter in the middle of the night," Sarah yelled, pointing directly at Richard's pale face. "You are lucky my husband stopped me from coming out there with a gun. You are completely finished." I walked over to the AV card and calmly closed my laptop, unplugging the HDMI cable. "I wouldn't leave just yet, Richard," I said over the noise of the crowd, checking my wristwatch. "The county sheriff's deputies should be pulling up in about 2 minutes." Right on cue, the piercing strobe of red and blue emergency lights illuminated the frosted glass windows of the recreation center's double doors. 2 uniformed Collin County deputies walked into the building, their hands resting naturally on their heavy-duty belts, assessing the chaotic room. The yelling died down almost instantly. I walked straight over to the lead deputy and handed him a heavy, sealed manila envelope. "Deputies, my name is Mark Davies," I said clearly. "Inside this envelope is a 128-gigabyte encrypted flash drive containing 18 hours of video evidence of criminal trespass, stalking, and property destruction. There is also a 40-page printed chronological log of 40 separate incidents. The suspect is Richard Vance, the man in the beige suit standing behind that table." The deputies looked at the thick envelope, felt its weight, and then looked across the room at Richard. They asked him to step out from behind the table. As they escorted him by the elbow, walking him down the center aisle, the reality of his situation finally broke his brain. He started thrashing slightly against the deputy's grip, looking back at the crowd of his horrified neighbors. "Without me, this whole subdivision goes to hell," Richard screamed, his voice shrill and desperate. "I kept this place clean. You people need me." Nobody said a single word. They just watched him get marched out the double doors and into the cold spring rain to take his official statement by the hood of the cruiser. His entire empire of neighborhood authority had just crumbled to dust in less than 5 minutes. The very next morning, at exactly 8:30 when the clerk's office opened, Attorney David Miller formally filed the civil lawsuit in the Collin County District Court. We sued the Homeowners Association as a corporate entity for breach of fiduciary duty, gross negligence, and failure to supervise a rogue board member. And we sued Richard Vance individually, piercing the corporate veil of his board protections, for criminal trespass, severe invasion of privacy, property damage, and the intentional infliction of emotional distress. We demanded exactly $80,000 in compensatory and punitive damages. When the HOA's massive corporate insurance provider received the 50-page lawsuit file and viewed the high-definition video of their board president looking into a child's bedroom window, absolute panic set in at their corporate headquarters. They did not want to go to a jury trial. They did not want legal discovery. And they absolutely did not want the local Dallas news stations broadcasting that footage on the 6 o'clock evening news with their corporate logo attached to the defense. The insurance lawyers drove up from Dallas and held an emergency executive session with the remaining board members. They informed the board that if Richard Vance was not immediately and permanently removed from his position, the underwriter would drop the community's master liability coverage effective at midnight. Richard was stripped of all board privileges that exact same day. The financial settlement took exactly 14 days to finalize. We sat in the polished mahogany conference room of David Miller's Dallas office. The insurance company agreed to pay the full $80,000. They briefly tried to attach a strict non-disclosure agreement to the settlement, essentially a permanent gag order. Miller looked at me across the table. I shook my head. If my client signs an NDA, the demand immediately goes up to $250,000, Miller told the defense attorneys. They quickly dropped the requirement. A week later, a certified cashier's check arrived via FedEx Priority overnight. I used the funds exactly as I had planned. Attorney Miller took his standard 30% contingency fee, which amounted to $24,000, and I firmly believe he earned every single penny of it. I recouped my initial $2,847 for the commercial surveillance equipment. I took another $3,000 and hired a local fabricator to build a custom, heavy-gauge steel frame for my side gate, outfitting it with an electronic keypad deadbolt that logs every physical entry attempt directly to my phone. The remaining $50,000 went straight into a 529 college savings plan for my 2 kids. Richard Vance essentially funded my daughter's future university tuition by being a neighborhood tyrant. As for Richard himself, the Collin County District Attorney did end up pressing criminal charges for Class B misdemeanor criminal trespass, based on the sheer volume of the documented incidents and the nighttime window footage. He avoided actual jail time because he was a first-time offender with a clean record, but he was hit with heavy court fines, 2 years of strict county probation, and a permanent restraining order forbidding him from coming within 500 feet of my family or my property line. But the legal consequences were nothing compared to the social execution. He was an absolute pariah in our subdivision. Nobody would look him in the eye. Neighbors would literally cross the street when he walked down the driveway to get his mail. His wife, who we genuinely believe had absolutely no idea about the terrifying depths of his obsessive behavior, was devastated and publicly humiliated. Less than a month after that chaotic recreation center meeting, a brightly colored for sale sign was hammered deep into the pristine grass of Richard's front yard. 3 weeks later, a pair of massive moving trucks parked on the street. I stood on my front porch holding a cup of black coffee and watched the movers load up his entire life. He drove away in that blindingly white Lexus SUV, looking straight ahead, and I never saw him again. The neighborhood fundamentally changed after he left. The remaining board members were absolutely terrified of another lawsuit. They held a special election and completely rewrote the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The new community bylaws explicitly stated that no board member could step foot onto private, fenced-in property under any circumstances. If a backyard inspection was deemed absolutely necessary for structural compliance, it required a signed, certified letter delivered 72 hours in advance, and the inspection had to be conducted by a licensed, independent third-party contractor. Dave, the retired Marine who had spoken up at the meeting, was elected as the new HOA president by a unanimous vote. His entire administrative platform was based on minding his own business and making sure the community pool stayed clean. The petty fines stopped. The threatening letters stopped. People actually started talking to each other over their cedar fences again. It has been over a year now since Richard's tail lights faded out of the neighborhood for good. I still check my cameras every single morning when I pour my first cup of coffee. It is an ingrained habit I will probably never break. I open the encrypted app on my phone, and I cycle through the lenses. I look at the massive custom steel gate. I look at the stamped concrete patio. I look at the hosta garden blooming beneath my daughter's bedroom window. But now, all I ever see are the gray squirrels, running along the top of the cedar fence, and the morning dew catching the early sunlight on the perfectly cut grass. The perimeter is secure. The castle is finally safe. Out here in America, and especially down here in Texas, property rights are not just a dry legal concept written in a dusty county ledger. They are the absolute foundation of our individual liberty. Your home is the one place on this earth where you get to dictate the terms of reality. When someone violates that space, whether it is a common burglar trying to steal a television in the middle of the night, or an arrogant HOA president with a tape measure trying to enforce his own petty authority in the broad daylight, they are stealing something much more valuable than physical property. They are stealing your peace of mind. They are stealing your family's fundamental sense of safety. People like Richard Vance don't operate out of a genuine, altruistic desire to keep a neighborhood looking nice. They operate out of a desperate, hollow need for absolute control. They use the guise of rules, regulations, and clipboards to mask their own deep insecurities, bullying people into submission because they have absolutely no real power or respect in their own personal lives. They assume that regular, hardworking people will just roll over, pay the fabricated fines, and suffer in silence because fighting the system is too expensive, too confusing, and too exhausting. And unfortunately, most of the time, they are right. But they forget that some of us know exactly how the systems work. Some of us understand that real power isn't about yelling the loudest at a monthly board meeting or driving the nicest car. It is about patience. It is about letting the other guy make the fatal mistakes. It is about quietly, methodically documenting every single violation, building an impenetrable wall of digital evidence, and then deploying it with absolute, ruthless precision when the time is right. If there is one piece of concrete wisdom I can pass on from 18 hours of surveillance footage, it is that sunlight is the absolute best disinfectant. Sometimes, you just have to be willing to shine the brightest, most unforgiving light possible on the people who prefer to operate in the shadows. Have you ever had an HOA board member, an entitled neighbor, or a local authority figure step completely over the line regarding your private property? And if you did, how did you finally put a stop to it? Let me know your story in the comments below.